Hi there, welcome. I'm Kathy, and today I'm excited to share my interview with my friend Lisa Frederiksen, who is a researcher on alcohol use disorder. So let me tell you a little bit more about Lisa. Lisa founded Breaking the Cycles to provide education, prevention, and intervention services on a range of addiction-related topics anchored in 21st century brain and scientific research. This research was guided by her 40-plus years of personal experience with secondhand drinking, a concept she introduced in 2009. Working to overcome its impact, she spent the last 16 years studying and simplifying this research on topics related to her experiences. These topics included alcoholism, drug addiction, alcohol and other drug use disorders, mental illness, co-occurring disorders, the family member's experience, toxic stress, adverse childhood experiences, codependency, brain development, and childhood trauma. So with that, I'd like to welcome Lisa Frederiksen. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm so excited in this video and in this interview to welcome my friend Lisa Frederiksen. I've known Lisa for many years. We met, I believe, online because we were both on similar paths, helping families with alcohol and drug issues. So today, I really want to learn more about the work that Lisa's doing and share it with all of you. So we're going to just get right into it. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. So good to be on your show. Thank you.
So Lisa, what is secondhand drinking, and what are some of the repercussions for families with teens or young adults who they're finding their kids are drinking too much? It's starting to get out of control. What can you tell us more about that?
So secondhand drinking is a term to describe the negative impacts on family members of a loved one whose behaviors change when they drink. And so some of those behavioral changes not only are tied to the alcohol changing the way brain cells talk to one another and therefore their behaviors, but also around an adolescent brain and how it interprets things and the way substance use disorders evolve into basically what you and I knew back in the day as addiction, but today now are called severe substance use disorder. So those negative impacts then cause the family member to try to be coping with something they generally don't understand, because we just didn't understand what this disease is. It's a brain disorder. And so all their attempts then are causing a lot of stress and anxiety for them, which then affects their physical and emotional health.
Okay, so sure, and it's I know it impacts parents greatly when kids go down. I mean, I feel like, for family members, maybe spouses too, but I think for parents, it's just watching this child who you have raised, and they're not adults a lot of the time. I mean, or they're young, and so it's like you're watching them get into these real scary-ish situations, and you feel overwhelmed and you feel like you can't control any of it, and it's horrible. Yeah. So
absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I know myself that I found astonishing in studying this research on not only substance use disorder but brain development and how the brain goes together in utero through about age 25. So it's now understood that the brain takes about 2.5 decades to develop. And it's what's going on particularly from around 12 with the onset of puberty that really starts to cause some of the problems. So if you'd like, I can explain puberty.
Sure, yes, do. Explain the impact of that and what happens during puberty and so what drives our kids to
start in
these roads, that are so unhealthy.
Yeah, so when we think about our children in elementary school and then suddenly they get into 6th, 7th, 8th in middle school, and there's this complete, like, what happened change? And that is the onset of puberty typically, which is an instinctual wiring process, meaning humans don't develop it or put it together. It just is there. And it was designed in the species for 3 reasons. The obvious one we all know is to create the physical body to be able to have sex and reproduce. But the other piece of that reproduce part was to create hormonal changes that made the species want to have sex so that it did have sex to reproduce. Other brain changes going on with the onset of puberty include the drive to take risk and the drive to turn to one's peers. And so this is what's happening to our kids when they entering in middle school, which is a whole new ball game, but they're entering it with this brain that's just really under rapid change. But it was understanding why that is the way it is in humans by going into the evolution of the human brain research that I started to do or did. And what we found is that mankind, or early humans, lived about an average of 25 years. So they needed that motor skill, and they needed the limbic system, which is where we have fight or flight, pleasure, reward, pain, and emotion. But they had no need for what we have as a cerebral cortex today. It's not until mankind's life gets more complicated as they, develop tools and on and on and on, and that we push synapses out to this part. And this is the part that's the brakes on those risk-taking behaviors. And they results in that higher level cause and effect, hindsight, judgment kind of thinking, reasoning that they can then apply to, it's not a good idea to do this right now. So with early mankind's lifespan at about 25 years and a very simple life, eat, stay safe, and reproduce, going through puberty was important because mom and dad were already dead. So if the species didn't go into puberty at 12, the species would have become extinct. So when we now start to understand that's what's driving this, if you will, this risk-taking behavior and the inability to think beyond the immediate reward, that's so important. Their friends are important. This feeling they often think of as love is really just the hormonal changes brought on by puberty. And so we're talking to them as if they have this kind of adult brain, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But until that prefrontal cortex area starts to come on board, it's really hard for them to relate to what we're talking about. So understanding that, then oftentimes it's like 12, 13, 14, 15 where the experimentation starts, because that's maybe what their friends are doing and it works for some of their friends. But then beyond that, we need to look at what is the genetics of that child, because if it is in the family, substance use disorder, that could be a contributing factor. If they have anxiety or depression or ADHD, that could be a contributing. So all of these things are influencing how the brain's going together at that time. And then when they start experimenting, because there are so many places for this to interrupt brain function, that's what can drive them to develop the substance use disorder so early. Okay. Hope that was enough.
Yes, no, interesting. No, and I think for you and for I think for any parent, it's important to know what's going on in the brain. It really is, because if you don't understand what's driving this,
yeah,
it just, I think the stress level goes down. You're more compassionate for your child if you understand what's behind it. If you're just thinking, my kid's being bad, well, or my kid's doing this to hurt me, that's not so helpful. It doesn't help.
No, they're not being obstinate in the sense of what we think of as obstinate. It's just a brain that's driven to take risk, reproduce, and turn to their peers without the hookup yet that's going to say, we got to wait. It's not going to bode well.
And it's just everywhere too. So it's just, there's so much peer pressure, I think kids, any child, young adult, a teenager, if they want to drink, they can figure out how to do it.
Absolutely.
So it's tough.
And they talk now, the parents that I work with, Snapchat is just such a big contributing thing to all of this, because it's not, there's no trail to follow for parents. That's often how they'll
interesting. So this new
order drugs or where they're going to get the drug and then it disappears. And so that's
not good. New technology is not so helpful in some ways. Okay, so Lisa, what helped you most in overcoming your personal challenges with having a loved one whose drinking affected your life? I appreciate that you gone through this. I think it isn't an essential part of helping a parent or a person, but I think it brings such another level of understanding when you've also had that personal experience of going through it.
Yeah, I think I agree. I know that's what's driven me wanting to do this work and naming my breaking the cycles, because it does go from one generation to another. We didn't quite understand why, but that's a whole nother video. But the thing that really, really helped me was cognitive behavioral therapy. I did that for 3 years with a therapist, and I was almost 50 when I finally started my recovery from secondhand drinking, because it had been almost 4 decades of dealing with various family members. And I kept thinking they should be able to stop. Why don't you stop? You know, and, but I had eating disorders. So I understood that desire to stop. And this is going to be the last time I do that. And, you know, and then you find yourself right back in it. But because I'd learned to re-eat, I always thought they could learn to re-drink. And so it was then the science of why that's not possible if they have alcoholism, or what you and I came into this knowing is alcoholism. Now it's severe alcohol use disorder. So yeah, so I would say it's the scientific research, understanding the brain. It explained they weren't doing this to me. It wasn't because they didn't love me enough. It was what went into their brain developing this. And one of the other key things is not only the stage of brain development, but experiencing traumatic events or extremely stressful traumatic events before 18 because of that influence in the brain wiring and mapping. So it was therapy and that. And then as I started to get more understanding, and I attended Al-Anon for a number of years. I don't do that anymore. People, you know, you can go into Al-Anon or Nar-Anon in any level you want. And for parents, there are some specific to parents, which I think is very important because it's people who understand what you're going through also. But there's not the crosstalk, and I really like crosstalk when I can say, yeah, but why? So that's what the science provided to me. And over the years, it's changed. I used, you know, mindfulness practices and nutrient-rich foods and exercise and getting adequate sleep and just simplifying my life. I know when I was in the throes and the early recovery, as I said, I was just turning 50. I was so intense and doing. And so one of the things that's helped for me is to simplify life. Like, what is really important that I do right now? So a long answer.
No, it's a great answer. And I think, you know, I think what comes to me is that you tried a lot of different things, and some, you know, some you continued for long periods of time, others you tried for a short amount of time. And I think that's what people need to do. It's not a one size fits all. Everyone needs to look at what is going to work for them. But look, you know, what I hope that people have is just to be really clear on all the options that are available, right, so that you can pick and choose, you know, and so that you know, there's not just one way. So that's great. I mean, it sounds like you had a variety of counseling, you had the Al-Anon approach, you had some other things that worked for you. And that's great. You know, that's really, really helpful. And I think we need different things at different times in
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
What I used in that beginning, you know, like you say, it changes. And as I got calmer and calmer and could self-soothe without going to my old map of reacting, I gotta fix.
Right. Yeah.
Then my life really took on a whole new direction. But it's so hard in that beginning because there's such a dance between the child or the spouse or the sibling who's using, and the parent or person, loved one, who's trying to anticipate and help. And so you get this dance going together. And when one finally starts to break away, do it differently, the other one either comes along or, you know, starts to. But the hard part about treating adolescent addiction especially is you need a treatment for the adolescent brain. And so the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, has principles of effective treatment for adolescents. So that's something parents can look at that will help them see, wow, this is what it's going to take to treat this brain, because it is a brain disorder and it's influenced by everything that went into putting that particular brain together. So, and as the brain's healing, then the way it's interpreting, or as it's just developing, a 16-year-old brain is going to interpret much different than a 12 and an 18 than a 14 and a 20, you know. So and because it takes until around 22 on average for girls, women, and 24 on average for boys, men, to reach that prefrontal cortex development, it's kind of a journey. So, and one other thing I wanted to say about the therapy is with somebody who understands addiction, because if they don't, it doesn't help. It just doesn't help.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, I tell people to, and you can go on Psychology Today and put in addiction and looking for people in your area that really do, and ask around, ask friends. And I think that too is one of the beauties of the Al-Anon, besides the support you get, but you can talk to people like, who are you using? What counselors do you have? You know, because it's people that are in your area. So it can really help you find resources. But no, I agree. It does not help if you don't have a counselor who's not schooled.
Not trained in this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll just talk for a long time.
Yeah.
We don't need that. We've been talking.
I know. All right. So advice for families. I know when parents, I mean, I've talked to parents and it's just, their kid, they'll go for a while and they think maybe things are getting better. The next thing you know, they find their son or daughter is now drunk again, or they're binge drinking, or, they've passed out, or something else has happened. And so what suggestions for parents, especially, I mean, I know it affects any family member. For my audience, it's usually parents who are concerned. But if a child, a young adult teen, has a problem with alcohol, what do you suggest parents do initially? I think that's where the huge stress comes from, of not knowing what to do.
Well, I think first of all is it's to understand that oftentimes when they lie or hide or cover up, it's not your real child in there. It's those brain changes that are automatically protecting itself to do what it wants to be doing at that point. This makes sense. So the things we do in practice then start to become our behavior. So just to know that your real child is in there, I think, number one. Number two is to get really solid in what alcohol or other drug use disorders are. Understand the science of it so that it's not going to go away. It's not going to, you will get more comfortable with setting your boundaries and then sticking to your boundaries. And then thirdly is to get help for yourself. And we think that that's the last thing that we need to do because this is more important. But the problem is we are so changed also. So if we're going to be able to not only live a joyful life ourselves, but to support them, we have to change the way we interact on this. And that comes with changing yourself. And that's one of the trickiest things to do because you think you just don't have time to do one more thing. My God, I've got to do this and that. And I've got these other 3 kids at home and I'm now working from home. But it's breaking it down into little teeny bites, little teeny changes, tiny changes, and then building on those. So.
No, that's great advice. I think I like your thought, especially at the end of, of course we need to reach out and get help, but parents, I think that is so often that missing piece. They're focused on their kids. They don't realize that, it really is going to be beneficial to everyone if they work on themselves first. Because there's a lot of dynamics, I think, with drinking or drug use in the family that some parents need to really understand and recognize and try to do differently. And approach things differently. So, we all, I know for me too, I mean, when I got help, you realize, you're in patterns that, you're not intentionally trying to cause issues, but you're in patterns that maybe aren't so helpful. And it's good to take a look at those. So help.
Instead of like direct communication, we kind of manipulate and we say, well, I thought you were going to, you said you would, instead of, here's the clear boundary. And when you cross it, here's the clear consequence.
Right.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Following through. Yes. That's the key. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, I totally understand. It's hard for parents. It's really hard. Not an easy thing. So I would say too, don't give it
hard anyway,
Right. Yeah. And to not give a consequence you're not ready to follow through on.
Right.
So Lisa has a wonderful site at Breaking the Cycles and books out. Tell us about where we can find out more about you, what we can, where people can learn more about you and see what you're,
sure.
What you're
thank you.
about.
Yeah. So it's breakingthecycles.com and I have a lot of blog posts there as well as, video and I do consulting work with families. I also do it with businesses or entities. And then I do a lot of speaking, a lot of presentations on this kind of stuff. I've written 6 books in this genre. The latest one is called the 10th Anniversary Edition, If You Loved Me, You'd Stop, which you really need to know when your loved one drinks too much. And I'd written the first one in 08, 09, but the science that's come since then is just amazing. And so this is the update of that. It's kind of like the cell phone of 2007, the first smartphone. We were like, oh, this is amazing. And then the smartphone today that has all these apps that kind of run our lives. That's the explosion in this research. So this one was intended, the first half is how a person develops an alcohol use disorder, any substance follows the same path. Behavioral disorders too, by the way. And then the second half is what the family member can do to help themselves, their other children, and how they're going to go forward with their loved one as they come out of treatment or continue in their treatment or don't. Yeah. So
and it's so needed. Yeah, it's so needed. Yeah.
And just to keep in mind that it's the 10th anniversary edition because the other one is still up, but it doesn't have the 10th piece in it. But yeah, I wanted to just kind of my swan song, if you will, of here's everything I've learned, and it's written in layperson's terms, so it's not.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. So yeah, I mean, I'll vouch for it. It's a wonderful book. Lisa explains everything. So, you know, anyone who's not, you know, maybe if you're even not science oriented, you can understand what she's talking about. You understand the brain and how the brain, you know, really why it's important to understand what's going on with the brain, you know. So, yeah. Okay. Lisa, thank you. This has been great. For people that are watching, if you like this interview, if this kind of information is helpful for you, do subscribe. And also leave a comment or question. I will make sure Lisa knows, you know, if somebody asks a question, she's already mentioned that she's more than happy to come on and answer questions. So you can, you know, ask questions below. So thank you. And again, check Lisa out at Breaking the Cycles. Check out her books. She's a wealth of information. She's been a wonderful resource. So do take advantage of that. So Lisa, thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for stopping by.
You're welcome. Thank you.